I was I was asked to go over what I did in class this week in environmental systems, so that's the point of this video. There's a lot of stuff in the lecture that I went over that's important for you to understand what we're doing. Maybe I'll talk about some of that as I go, but this is just really a functional lesson here. First thing we did was download a CAD Mapper site model. So I went to cadmapper.com and make sure you're on Rhino. I used a site in Hoboken because I know it and I wanted a hill. I made a site that was larger, sort of a urban scale site, because the point of this is that you don't just have to use the site that one site. You can have different sizes, and big unruly sites can be difficult to use for things that we're doing in this class because for example, if you're doing a clipping mask, it clips the entire site, and so it takes up space, and you have to, your view settings and stuff can be difficult. Anyway, so I already downloaded this because I named it Environmental Systems 1. I'm going to just to be thorough here, I'm going to rename this, and I'm going to open it in Rhino 7. So the first thing I did was organize my layers. I've said before that that's a really important part of this class, and it's really like an outline in writing. So I'm going to do that quickly here. And again, this is something that's in any classroom with me. It's important. It's almost like, well, it's like learning a language. I mean, then you write books and things in the language, but you got to learn the language first, right? So I've got this model here. I'm gonna turn off my grid because I don't really want to see that. I just make it cleaner. And now I'm going to make a subset of this model. I'm going to trim it. So I'm going to duplicate layers and objects. I'm going through this very quickly because you can stop and scroll through the through the video, or you can make it go faster, go second, 2 times or 1.5 times. All I did was, by the way, just to go back over that, I right-clicked, I chose duplicate layers and objects, and then made sure that I said yes to all because then I wanted everything that was in the layers also. I'm going to call this trim. Turn off this layer, the full layer. Now I have a copy that's just this trim layer. I'm also going to create a layer called tools. You can call it something else or not even have it, but I always think it's good to have, if I'm going to be using geometry to cut things and uh, etc. It's good to have it sort of it's just a place where I dump stuff that's not the actual model, but that I'm using in the model. All right, so my first point was that I want to create some kind of subset of this model. So I'm going to just decide I want it to be, so basically this area around here is the site around these buildings in my mind that I'm making up right now. So I'm going to, let's say, zoom into here and just do a curve that I'm going to use to cut this or to trim it. Now, why would I do that? You see, I'm in, my default is always to have the site analysis tab in Climate Studio on and have Climate Studio enabled with a climate file. That's another thing I didn't say. You'd have to set this climate file when you came in. Let me do that for you. So let's remind ourselves that you've downloaded Climate Studio. It's somewhere, like in my case, it's here in a tab. You might already see it as a bunch of icons up here. What I want you to do is to set it up as a panel like this. So if you select one of these, for example, site analysis, it'll show up as a panel, and then you can hit the settings tab here and add results. I'm going to take off results. So I just got a call, so we get reoriented here. Okay, so I was going to show you how to get a climate file if we haven't already done that, or if you haven't followed it. I'm in, so I set up my Climate Studio. Oh yeah, right. I'm gonna bring in results. I always want to have this set up this way, where I have my Workflows tab and my Results tab. And again, for me, Climate Studio is just a part of my, it's like having layers on, it's like view settings. It's just a part of what I use in just in any kind of design scenario. Makes sense to me that that's the way you would do too, but it's up to you. But in this class, we're going to be using Climate Studio somewhat, so let me give you a quick intro into how to set it up. I've got my workflows tab. This will be where the results show up when we do actually run simulations. Site analysis is the first workflow. This drop down is, these are a bunch of simulations that you might use. Site analysis is just, there's nothing that actually gets output as a result, but it's visual in the graphics window. First thing we need though to use Climate Studio is a um, climate file. I think when you open it up the first time, the default, there's always going to be one. It's Boston. If you click on this folder, you can pick climate files by searching. Here's some New York ones. Download them into and they immediately show up and are then used in this file. You can also get climate files other places, and we can talk about that. I always have my compass on because I want to know, I want to always be oriented. Anyway, so that's what I was saying is that I've got my compass on, and if this is my site and I'm doing an environmental analysis, which you guys are just starting to do, but you might know this already. I mean, all this stuff back over here to the north, if I'm talking about wind and sun, it's not really going to be relevant. The sun, anything to the north of my site is not going to be relevant from sun. Wind, okay, I want to know sort of what I have right around my site because it might be blocking wind. So that's why I chose, um, a smaller site like this. I'm going to now create a trimming object. So I've got my curve. I'm going to just extrude it with my gumball and then move it to where it's going to be cutting through the whole model. The gumball is super powerful. Like for example, if you right click on it, snappy draggy is what allows you to snap to things much easier. So anyway, just you may notice things that I'm doing that your model's not set up to do, and that's because you just have some different setting, and we can figure out what it is if you talk to me about it. All right, so, and again, I'm going to quickly do this because I'm not trying to get this finished. I'm just trying to show you the basic idea. So first of all, I'm going to turn off everything except for my topography because that's all I'm going to cut first. My topography is this shape, right? And I want to trim it down. If I select it, I can see that it's a mesh, right? So I'm gonna have to find a mesh tool, and there is mesh split. So I'm gonna do mesh trim. Let me change that back. So I'm trimming the mesh. It's asking me what object to trim because I guess I'd already selected the cutting object. So I'm gonna hit trim. Oop. It glitched out, so I started over again. Yeah, select cutting objects. You can see here. So I'm going to select the cutting object, hit enter. Now it's asking me the objects to trim. If I select the mesh outside of the cutting box, then I cut it. I don't think I moved, so make sure you hit enter too to get out of that command. I don't think I moved this to my trim layer. If I select it, right click on the trim layer, say change object, and now if I turn that off, here's my trimmed site. I'm gonna go ahead and put that on my trim layer too. This case I need it. So the first thing I want to do is I'm gonna make this a physical object rather than just this surface or this mesh. If I select it, my gumball, my trusty gumball, and select the sphere in the middle, That's the extrusion sphere. I can just pull it down and extrude it. I just want to make it big enough. I'm trying to think of something. I want to make it to where it's something like I can sit on my desk if I were to, because I could 3D print this. I could CNC route it. But I'm also trying to make something that's more of a sort of a graphically clear version of my site and just show you something you can do really. Okay, now I'm going to split this. So I'm going to go to a top view and I'm going to make a surface that's larger than my site and then move it. This is just eyeballing it. I want to, there's no right or wrong here, but I don't want to have a huge box at the bottom of it, but I want to have enough to have a little bit of a plinth there. I think that looks good. I like it. Now I'm going to do a mesh, because this is still a mesh split. It's asking me the objects to split, so I'm going to select my mesh, hit enter, and now it's asking me for the cutting objects. I'm going to select that and hit enter, and now it has split it. I'm going to delete the bottom, and I'm going to go ahead and put this on my trim layer 2. Why not? Now I've got this little solid mesh thing that is going to be the world that I'm designing on. And I'm going to select it and hit cap and put the cap command in. Hit enter. So now I've capped it. If I go to shaded, oh, it is shaded. Huh, interesting. I change the color of it, and you can see it more clearly. Let me make. I mean, I don't really usually like to do colors. I'll just do a gray, like a darker gray. And it is already. Okay. So here's my topography, and so if I turn back on some other stuff, I'm going to leave the buildings off for now. Turn on everything else. Turn back on my trim tool. I can trim some of the rest of the stuff. This, I'm going to delete this now. I don't even need that anymore. The thing I cut the site with. So I'm going to go back to the top view, and this is a typical. Sorry, it's interesting. I'm just curious what this. Oh, this is part of the site. Okay. So the way trim works here, I'm just going to use. This is just a line trim, so I'm going to just use the trim command. It's asking me to select my cutting object, so that's the box, on the outside, right? Enter. Now I'm going to start trimming. And the way this works is I'm just selecting anything that's both inside and outside the box to trim it. So you see it's only trimming things that are up on both sides. So that's kind of the method here. And then the rest of this that it's not touching. And by the way, the reason you couldn't see everything on the other side is because I have the topo on. So if I let me hit enter just to get this done. Yeah, so that would have made this clearer that all those things were touching. See, like this line here was touching that line, and so I trimmed it. There's probably more to trim, but now the point is I can just delete the rest of the stuff. Now I may be making some mistakes here. You got to be careful because if you didn't trim everything, now it's possible you could be deleting stuff you don't want to delete, whatever. Like it looks like I didn't. Yeah, I did catch that though. I did see it right there. I deleted something inside that I didn't want to, I think. And finish it, even though it's kind of not necessary because this is a demo. Okay. I can do the same thing with, looks like maybe I didn't trim this yet, so let me hit trim again. Yep. Okay. Now I can also trim the buildings this way, so if I turn the buildings back on, anything that's touching both, and I'm going to hit trim. It's asked me for the cutting object, and now I can trim these buildings. Oops, it didn't take for some reason. I wasn't paying attention. Select cutting objects, enter. Objects to trim. This, this, this. See, if I try to select this one, it's not going to take because it's not actually touching the cutting object, but this is, that isn't, and then all these are. Okay. And so then I can hit enter to get out of that and just delete the rest of these buildings. Oops, I'm still in trim. Um, Go up to here. Okay, so I can turn back on my topo, and I can come back in and I can select these. I can select them all at once. I think cap them. So the command is cap to cap the solid. Um, I mean cap an open poly surface. Okay. So there I basically have what I showed in class. Now let's make sure that we're set up for the assignment. If I come and turn, if I'm in site analysis, one of the things you're asked to do is look at the sun. And, so we've got climate consultant and climate studio. Climate consultant is just the climate, the macroclimate, not the microclimate, right? We talked about the difference in the lecture. Uh, when we have our site like this and we're looking at the sun, we're looking at the microclimate or the macroclimate creating the microclimate. Um, so it's the context is what makes the microclimate. So I can turn on now shadows. Let me show you. And now if I moved the, okay, this is great because something's not working here. It's because there's not all the settings aren't the way we want them. So let me just go ahead and do that right now. I'm going to select the mesh, come to properties. So I'm selecting properties. That's set up correctly. So I want the mesh, actually I want the mesh to only receive shadows, not cast shadows. And the reason I want that is because I want the buildings to be able to put shadows on the mesh, but I don't want the mesh putting a shadow onto the outside, onto the ground out here. It's not because I've gone into, this is going to be a little bit confusing because I'm going to go quickly, but it's a video. You can go back and look at it. So I'm going to go to my standards so I can find the settings tool here. Click on settings. I'm in view, display modes. If I go to CS shadows, if I turn on the ground plane, let me see if it's working. That's really funny. I was having it, it's not working because so I'm in the, so by the way, let's go back to that. In Rhino, if you're in the standard tools, there's the settings wheel. You click on that. If you haven't used it before, you've got document specific properties and Rhino properties. These are the things that are the basic setup for your Rhino models that will be consistent throughout. If I close this file and open it again, the settings should be the same. In here, I had this, in CS Shadows, I had the lighting scheme set to default. That was because a student had a problem that we discovered was because they had it set to default lighting, and I didn't change it back. So we want it should be your default already, but we want it to be on scene lighting. Okay, so if I do that, I can see that now I'm going to go back to that settings tab. Again, you're going to be your head's going to be spinning a little bit if you haven't done this before because I'm going back and forth quickly. Stuff is not super critical right now. I'm going to turn off the ground plane settings, and you're going to see what's going to happen is that the shadows that the buildings are casting are going to turn off, right? And so that's what I want. I want My building's casting shadows on the site, but I don't want anything casting shadows out here onto the, because everything, all this white is just what's called the ground in Rhino. And I'm trying to pretend like this is the whole world, my little model here. And so I don't want any shadows cast onto the Rhino ground. Anyway, so we're set up to where we can look at shadows in Climate Studio, and you'll notice this looks exactly like um, solar window I had in the the lecture, because this is where it came from. So hopefully the lectures helps you understand what this is. Okay, so now we've created a model, but we do have the other model. If we ever want to look at the full model, we've got it right there, right? So powerful. We can have as many different model sets as we want. Um, okay, so next, let's talk about Climate Consultant, but I'm going to make a separate video so that this doesn't get too long for anybody watching a single video. So that's my summary of how to play around with an initial, how to generate a site model and set it up to work for the kind of simulations that we will be using, or I'm sorry, the kind of environmental analysis we'll be doing in this class. All right.